Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Joseph Capps coming back to you again for another episode of our podcast, Dancing with the Darkness. If you are a first time listener to the show, welcome. So glad that you're either watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify. And my only wish and hope and prayer is that this reaches you in a deep or profound way and helps you in your walk, your daily walk of life in a positive way. This channel is a raw, unfiltered. We're not that graphic where I put a trigger warning up, but this is a kind of a raw and unfiltered account of what it's like living with CPTSD. We have a growing community on here, and it resonates and helps us feel less alone. But also, we throw in a lot of hope on this channel. That is one of the greatest missions of my channel, is to give you hope, to not just talk about the struggles from my own personal view as a CPTSD survivor, but we throw in a lot of clinical, all kinds of things that I've learned through my 20 plus years of studying this disorder and becoming a traumatologist and from the clinical end. But it's also coming very much from the experiences of my life, and at 50 years old, the struggles that I still have that are not overpowering or controlling anymore, but they're still there, and we have to acknowledge them, and we have to walk beside that part of ourselves and learn how to turn that pain into purpose. And that's what we're here to talk about. Return listeners, thank you so much for your patronage. It's because of you and your comments. Number one, your comments are so important to me personally, because as a CPTSD survivor like you, I deal with all of the same inner and outer critic stuff. And so when you share and you're personal and you tell your story on here, it is extremely affirming and validating for me, to help me know that I'm not only bringing good content, but my prayer, like I said, is that I'm helping you in some sort of way. If there's anything that I can do for any other individual to keep them from suffering what I have suffered, it is a true victory. And it is an absolute profound experience for me. So thank you so much for sharing and being vulnerable, and it's been wonderful. I want to also thank you so much for liking and sharing the video. And all I ask is that if this video speaks to you and you think that it would help someone else, please spread that to them, because we're only here to help others, and it's greatly appreciated. So I want to say I'm excited about today, but I'm really not, because this is kind of a painful thing to talk about. But as I've said before in my podcast, a lot of times I'm not led in any kind of methodical way. I don't have a calendar of topics or things that I schedule out to talk about. I try to make this podcast very personal, and by doing so, I look at what I'm going through during the week, and a lot of times through that and through my prayer and through experiences, whether they be hard ones or victories during the week, that's how I try to culminate the experience that we have at the end of the week. And I hope and pray that I'm always able to do that, because I don't want this to be generic. I don't want it to be cookie cutter in any kind of way. I want it to be very raw and personal, so that you can feel me and my empathy for you, and you can feel the genuineness, and we can establish trust and rapport, and that this podcast, especially this channel, is a place for you to comment and to be vulnerable and to never expect judgment or any of those things. The outer critic likes to remind us quite a bit that everyone in the world is not safe, and so we need to have a safe community. We've been talking recently over the past few weeks. We've covered some topics that are all kind of related. We were talking about the difference between alone and loneliness. We've been talking about some of the hang-ups that kind of hold us back. And one of the critical areas that we've covered before on the channel, but I want to cover it in a totally different way today, is attachment strategies. And we've talked about the various attachment strategies, as an adult that's in adult relationships, and how we're navigating that. But I want to talk about specifically today the stuff that is left over from our childhood, the very reason we form these attachment strategies, and to understand it from that point of view. And quite honestly, what really led me to this was I had a devotion this week, and it was talking about, it's one of my favorite scriptures actually. It was Jesus talking about how he wanted us to come to him in a childlike way. He didn't say childish, but he said that we needed to come unto him like a child. And what he's talking about is that innocence, that humility. It's untainted. It's a real experience. You're coming to him with innocence and vulnerability, before you're tainted by the sin of the world and the trauma and all of the bad things that happen to me. And what this made me think about is that when it comes to healing, as a person with CPTSD, especially in our relationships, okay, relationships are critical. A lot of what distinguishes CPTSD against other disorders, there's a lot of crossover symptoms, but this is a pretty defined area for developmental trauma that goes into CPTSD, is that relationships, we struggle in relationships because of what we went through as a kid. And you know what? We were created to be social animals. We are created to be part of a pack. We are not meant to be alone. And so this is a critical area for our physical, mental, and spiritual health, to be able to have healthy relationships. And it doesn't mean you have to have 100 relationships, but you need to, we need to at least have one, right? We need to at least have one person in our life that we can feel that we can be vulnerable and safe, and we don't have to fear abandonment, right? And so I want to talk about how these things, they're left over from childhood. And so we go into adulthood and we form these strategies like we talked about in past videos. But today I want to talk about how that childlike self, that inner child that is innocent and is vulnerable, how that shows up as an adult, so that we have a whole new perspective. Because we need to understand that we're not just surrendering our adult self to a deep, intimate relationship when we get to that point. We're also surrendering that inner child and that innocence and, that part of ourselves that we've spent our entire life protecting because of the inner critic and the outer critic, okay? And so we need to understand the magnitude of that, and we need to understand that when we get into these intimate relationships and we have these hiccups or these setbacks, we need to understand that it's not just our adult self and what is hardwired in our brain. We need to understand that there's also a vulnerable, innocent part of ourself that is showing up here, and that also needs to be nurtured, not just by us. But we have to be able to trust the other person that we are in this relationship with to also nurture this inner child and love this inner child. It has to be a package deal, okay? And this is where you ultimately can completely trust and completely be vulnerable. And I am here to tell you, this is where some of the most amazing healing happens when it comes to CPTSD, because this evidence and this experience is what is contradicting and arguing against the inner and the outer critic that have defined every relationship that you've ever had. So I'll ask you some questions. Do you ever find yourself needing constant reassurance? It doesn't matter what relationship it is, but especially in an intimate one, do you feel like you just constantly have to have reassurance in that relationship? Even when your partner is doing everything they can to tell you everything is fine, they're literally at the point of frustration. You're like, I swear everything's fine. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with me. Everything's okay. But we still constantly want that reassurance. And this is us showing up as an innocent child that was hurt and abused and abandoned most times, okay? So we're not just showing up as an adult that isn't healed. We're also showing up as this innocent child. And I think that if we can reframe this and we can look at it from that perspective, and we can look at the fact that it's our adult self and our little self that's showing up in this relationship, it's going to help us crack the code a little bit better and to understand, even if it's a matter of just being able to articulate that to our partner to help them understand. And quite frankly, I hate to say it, but if we have CPTSD and we find ourselves in a relationship with a partner that doesn't want to put the work in, or doesn't want to understand, or doesn't have the patience to be there for your inner self as you're healing, then unfortunately it's just the tragic cycle that we're in, and we're in another wrong partner relationship. And it pains me to say that because I've spent my whole life living that as well, and so I understand. So, our partner is telling us everything they can. They're doing everything they can in their power to assure us, but we still need assurance. Another thing that we may do in relationships is that we push people, we push them away. Right when things start getting close and things start getting comfortable, we will push them away, and it's because we have these overwhelming deep feelings, and we're terrified. We're terrified of losing what we have, and it seems like it's better for us, out of a protective mechanism, to just get rid of the relationship now before it gets any deeper, right? Because I'm not going to be able to handle this loss. I've handled loss my entire life, but this loss I'm not going to be able to survive, right? So it's really a very intimate insecurity as a little child that is trying to survive and navigate the world. So you may be my age, you may be 50 years old, and you're like, I'm not a child. Well, I'm sorry, but there's still that wounded inner part of you that's never been able to heal, and it's never been able to develop in the proper healthy way. Okay, so this is part of it. What if I told you that these patterns didn't start in adulthood like we're talking about? These patterns didn't start now. This isn't a new thing. The real reasons for these confusing and painful dynamics are hidden in our childhoods, plain and simple. They're not character flaws. I don't want you to think that. This is basically survival. We are surviving, and it's a pattern that we've always had to adapt to survive. Okay, and when we hear childhood trauma, often we're thinking about big obvious events, like we talked about in the last video. We talked about the difference between these big events that are cut and dry, and we're negating the fact that it's often also death by 1,000 cuts, is what I like to say. It's little teeny micro traumas that are consistent, and they don't stop. And this develops these patterns. It develops these survival mechanisms all the way from childhood, and that's how we live our lives, is that we are in a self-preservation state. These things can be very quiet and unseen, and can be simply, emotional neglect that has caused these things. Maybe, some of you may not have had, some what we would call horrific abuse, like physical and sexual and stuff of that nature, but, you equally had abuse where your parents did not show up emotionally. They were physically there, but they were emotionally checked out. And as a child that has mirror neurons in their brain, and is trying to navigate the world, and is trying to learn all of the things it has to survive, this is very, very damaging. And it causes us to develop in a way that we are still in a survival state. And this is why our nervous systems and everything else are still all jacked up and having problems. It's because of this. This would be like, you're a child that was constantly ignored, dismissed, or you're just made to feel like your needs don't matter, period. These experiences leave a really big impact on our brains as they're developing. It shapes our ability to trust, to connect, and to love as an adult. And so, I want to uncover, some of these hidden patterns that, some of them we can talk about, that we've talked about, that are pretty obvious, like we've talked about in, the anxious, avoidant, and dismissive attachment styles. But some of them are a little bit more incognito, and so I want to give you some distinct differences, because maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm not really anxious, and I'm not really avoidant, and maybe I'm not really disorganized. Maybe there's something in there that you feel like you are in a relationship, and I'm hoping that today is going to explain that to you and help you understand why you show up that way in the relationship. So imagine you're an adult, and you have been stuck in cycles of anxiety and self-sabotage in these relationships. This has been over and over and over again. As soon as you start connecting, honestly, it's just not going to start getting better. It's not going to start getting to a pattern that we can change until we start to understand that we need to connect the dots from our past as a child. By following this journey, we're going to get a new roadmap of understanding, and we're going to understand our own uh, intimately our own relationship patterns and why we do it. And I'm hoping today that, maybe some of you can start taking the first step towards healing. That's my hope and my prayer, is that something in this video can jumpstart something in your healing process. So, the first pattern I want to go over is basically the fear of abandonment. And, this is where that constant reassurance seeking comes from. And the reason why is, we have this deep nagging fear of abandonment, and it shows up often as an anxious or clingy behavior. And we need to understand that, people that have this need for constant reassurance from their partners, we can even panic. I've experienced this. We can get to a point where we even panic if a partner wants some space, or we overthink. We like to overanalyze every single text, every single word. We feel a sense of dread when we're alone, away from this person. And we need to understand that this is a pattern from childhood. Okay, so let's say as an adult, you get into this relationship, things are starting to go well. We talked about this last video, that we do tend to trust very easily, but we don't trust completely. So this is what I want to talk about. So we jump headfirst into this relationship. We desperately want to trust. We desperately want the intimacy and the connection. We desperately want to be loved and nurtured, but we're fighting the inner and the outer critic. Okay, and so there's a level here. Especially those that faced abandonment or lack of emotional connection with their parents. We have a very, very anxious attachment strategy here, and we constantly need assurance, and we constantly overanalyze. And for the benefit of maybe partners in these relationships that may be listening to this podcast or watching, I understand how taxing and how exhausting that this can be on those of you that are partners of people with CPTSD that might listen. It's very, very hard, because you get into a pattern as the other person in the relationship that you're wondering if they believe you. Do they even believe that I love them? What do I need to do to help them understand that I love them? And you can feel hopeless because you don't think that you can ever do enough or say the right thing or do the right thing to get them to really understand that and to believe that. So let's say that you're in this relationship, and you're the anxious partner. You're the one that suffered this emotional abuse as a child. This is what it kind of looks like. You might be the person in the relationship that your partner says they need some space, or they need some alone time, or whatever. And your mind immediately wants to catastrophize this situation. You start thinking that the partner is losing interest. You start thinking that something's wrong, that they're not in love with you anymore. And ultimately, you're preparing for them to leave you and to abandon you. Okay. And this fear tends to feel so huge that it is consuming. And the problem is that this fear stays in the relationship way too long. It's not momentary. It's not like, they say, hey, I need some alone time, and you get over it within 10 minutes. This lingers on, and it causes paranoia and fear, and it can cause a wedge between your relationship, because you start texting comments or making comments that make the other person think that you're doubting them and you're not trusting them. And so that's what it looks like. It stays in the relationship too long. And the reason why is because a lot of times being alone to this person, to this wounded child, it feels worse than being unhappy. Okay? Alone feels worse than being unhappy. This came from a childhood where care was inconsistent. I mean, this is what you developed into, and it's not your fault. I mean, this is what happened. You may have grown up with an emotionally unavailable mother. Maybe she was there, but her affection came and went without warning. Okay, there was no consistency to it. There was no pattern that you could develop. There was no system of rewards or punishment that you could grasp. Okay, so as a little child, you start to learn that love can just disappear for no reason at all. Okay, and this is pretty scary. We don't understand our parents' emotional state at that time. our little childhood brain decides to make a simple, powerful rule. If I'm not always watching, if I'm not always hypervigilant, I will be abandoned. And this follows us on into adulthood, okay? This is a survival skill. It's a survival skill that protected us as a child. And so now we've gone into our adult life and into our adult relationships, and this survival skill is still there, and it's hardwired into our system, into our brain. And this is why we continue to do it. The problem here is that this ends up being the very thing causing so much anxiety and strain in the relationship that we're in. The second pattern is we have to talk about the avoidance factor, or the avoidant attachment style as an adult, and where that comes from. This is where we literally avoid intimacy and emotional distance. And once again, this is inner and outer critic doing this, because number one, the inner critic is telling us that we are unlovable and no one is ever going to love us. And the outer critic is reinforcing that by finding flaws in every single person in the world to try to show us that they are unsafe. Okay, like we are overanalyzing, overthinking, and searching for something that we can determine as a flaw to reinforce this hardwired belief that we are not safe with that person. Okay, so that's where that comes from. This is coming from a whole other side of trauma as a child. Okay, to where we may completely avoid intimacy altogether out of fear. And if you're somebody that, maybe you're listening to this and you almost feel like you get suffocated by closeness. Let's say that you feel suffocated by closeness and you have this powerful urge to pull away when the relationship starts to get serious, or you start to feel these feelings that you really don't want to feel. You might resist commitment altogether. You may struggle to show your emotions to the other person. And often you will create distance between you and the other person. Even when you really do love this person and care about them. And that's the real tragedy here. Let's look at what this looks like as a child. How did this happen? Why am I doing this as an adult? Okay. Well, maybe you were a child that had a father who was emotionally volatile. Okay. In your childhood home, being vulnerable led to pain or ridicule. And I might just be talking about myself with both of these examples, and that's fine. I don't care. I'm an open book, but I need you to understand that this is where this comes from. Okay. So being vulnerable, being in pain, it led to severe ridicule. In some cases, it even led to physical abuse, because you're not allowed to have a headache. You're not allowed to have a stomach ache. What do you mean you have a fever? I'm no stranger to that. I got screamed at by my father when I was sick, like it was my damn fault. So I was terrified to be sick. Okay? No weakness. No weakness allowed, no vulnerability allowed. He was hardwired by his father, and that's how this chain of abuse continues on. And so he felt like the only way he could benefit me as a father was to be a hard ass and to make me as strong and as tough as he possibly could. And then, maybe I would be safe in the world. He didn't realize the damage that he was doing. This is a hard lesson that we learn, okay? We learn by this experience that if we show emotion, it's very, very dangerous for us. And as an adult, we put off this aura that we are totally cool and self-sufficient. I've got this. I'm fine. I'm good to go. It's one of the many masks that we learn to wear as a CPTSD survivor. We may even be successful. We may have friends, but they're really not friends. We have to be real careful how we define friendship, okay? I define it very, very seriously, and friendship to me means a commitment. It means that I'm going to love that person selflessly and be there for them, okay? So I don't call people friends unless I really, really mean it. Okay, so friendships in this regard, as a child like this that grows into this adult that's cool and self-sufficient, it's surfacey. It's nothing to it. It's more of a very platonic type thing. Okay, so we call these people friends, but they're just really acquaintances. They're people that say, "Hey, how you doing?" You know what I mean, and that's it. But they don't really care how you're doing, if that makes sense. This child grows up to an adult that, when they do get into a romantic relationship, it's got brakes and boundaries on it. Okay, we got to pump the brakes. We're not going to let this thing get so deep. Okay. The partner that's with us normally really wants more emotional connection, okay? And when that happens, we shut down. And this is the classic scenario here. And the sad thing is a lot of times we'll see an avoidant person be with an anxious person, okay? And they're feeding off of one another, but eventually it breaks and they can't be together, and it causes a lot of damage, okay? What are some of the things that we do with that avoidant attachment strategy? Well, guess what? We find, remember the outer critic? Well, we start finding flaws with the other person. We find reasons not to trust them, not to love them, not to let them get close, to reinforce the voice of the outer critic that they're going to hurt us and we're not safe. Okay, so that manifests in us, picking fights, being cold, or we may just end it. We may just break up with absolutely no reasoning whatsoever. It's just like, hey, you know what, we're done. And we just blow the other person off, and we left them, or leave them oftentimes even more broken than they already were. So there is a path of pain here that continues on. And eventually, that's also part of our healing process, is that we have to take accountability. We have to take accountability in ourselves, and we have to understand that a lot of times we are also guilty here, okay? And so part of our healing is for us to be able to acknowledge our part of things, okay? For this person that's in this attachment style, this emotional distance feels like safety. And it leaves us feeling incredibly lonely is the problem. We feel like we're doing the right thing to protect ourselves, but then it provokes an extreme case of loneliness within us. So the next one I want to talk about is what we call codependent behavior and or overgiving. And this is one that, you'll hear this talked about in like recovery groups and stuff like that, but I don't think that people really truly understand what codependency is. It's this term that just gets thrown around. And so I want you to understand what that looks like, and I want you to understand why and how that showed up from childhood. This is looking, a lot of times like a compulsion to overgive, to fix, or to take care of others. And usually it's at your own expense. Okay. So this is beyond fawning and people pleasing. This is a little bit more extreme than that. Okay. This is very, very common for adults who were parentified as kids. Okay. So this is when we are made to be much more mature and much more self-sufficient. And not only that, but we are also in a position a lot of times, like we've talked about in past videos, where we end up maybe even becoming the surrogate for our own parents. We become the one that's managing the emotions and the moods, and we end up comforting our parents, or if we have siblings, we may end up being the parent to our siblings because maybe we're the oldest child and we feel like we have to protect them. So this is what we're talking about with this parentification. So we're taking on some extreme adult responsibilities, and we are becoming the emotional rock for our own parents or our siblings way too early in life. Okay. And, if this feels heavy right now, just take a deep breath, because this happened to a lot of us. And I understand that, this may feel like it's hitting below the belt right now because it's tough. It's really, really tough to understand this. So what does this look like? Well, from my own past, I can tell you that the first part of my childhood, I got parentified because I was with a single mother who was an alcoholic. And so, there was a real struggle there. She would be at work and then she would come home, and I basically had a mother figure until the alcohol kicked in. We talked about some of those triggers in the last video. You see she had a blue cup that would come out, and the orange juice would go in and the vodka would go in, and I knew that it was a matter of time before that evolution would take place, and she would literally change in front of my eyes. Okay, so this is, not just talking about the abuse that followed, but this is the parentification that I'm talking about. Okay, so she struggled with this alcoholism, and a lot of time this is where we end up seeing codependent behavior. Okay. And if if both of your parents are around, maybe one of your parents had an addiction and you ended up being the one that was comforting the other parent, or ended up being the surrogate for their emotions. So maybe it was a domestic situation and, your other parent was being abused, and now as a child, you're becoming the peacemaker and the protector. Okay. And this is part of that parentification that makes us exhibit codependency behaviors. We start thinking and learning that our value comes from being helpful or from managing everyone else's feelings. Okay, so we internalize this new role, and it follows us into adulthood. Okay, to be loved, I must be needed. Okay, to be loved, I have to be needed by somebody. Okay, now there is a component of that that's true, because I believe that if you're truly in love and you have an equal partner and you're doing things in a healthy way, it's very, very healthy to need each other. Okay, because that exhibits trust and it makes the other person feel good to be needed by you, because it gives us worth. But we cannot base the entire relationship on this, that if I'm not needed by my partner, I lose all of my value and my worth. Okay, this is what we're talking about. It's extreme. So as an adult, this person or this child is going to grow up, and they are going to find themselves drawn to partners that they think they can fix or rescue. Okay, they pour all of their energy into their problems, this other person's problems, and they start to push their own goals, their own aspirations, and their own well-being aside. They are no longer important. It's all about the other person. And as long as they're needed by that person, they feel like they have worth and that they're loved. Okay. This is the person that shows up an adult that we apologize for everything, right? It's almost like we apologize for breathing sometimes. We apologize especially for things that are not our fault. We have a really hard time setting boundaries because saying no makes us feel guilty. It took me a long time to understand that the word no is actually a complete sentence. It really, really is, and it's okay. We're terrified that if we say no and we set up boundaries, we're going to lose relationships. This dynamic, it leaves us exhausted, and it also leaves us resentful. We keep doing it though, right? We keep doing it because being the fixer is the only way that we know how to feel worthy of love. So I know this is tough. I had to pause for a second, because it's tough for me. I do these videos and it's very, very personal. I feel a lot of these things too. Okay. The next pattern, a lot of us have learned that we need some sort of control, and also we feel like perfectionism is the only option. And this is a tough one. This is from growing up in a home that was chaotic, unpredictable, and most of all, unsafe. When a child's worth or their world feels out of control, you learn to micromanage yourself, even as a kid. You're micromanaging your little corner of the universe. And we do that just to feel safe. Whatever we have control over, we feel like gives us the ability to be safe. In adulthood, this child ends up needing things done a certain way, obsessively being a planner, or they try to control their partner's choices. Okay? Now, God tells us in a relationship that, the man should lead, but it's talking about leading spiritually. It's not talking about controlling the other person. They are meant to be our partner, our better half, and we are meant to make big decisions together. And so when we're showing up in these relationships where we're literally trying to control a partner's choices, that's a fine line that we're walking to where we're actually being abusive to our partner. Okay, and we have to take accountability for that. As we start to understand our other patterns, we see this one too. We see that we are a meticulous planner, that we can't handle chaos. And the reason why is because we had so much chaos as a child, and it was really, really hard. If we go out on a date, let's say, every single detail is mapped out. Everything is planned out. In our relationships, we're always offering unsolicited advice, or maybe putting our 10 cents in when it's not needed, whether it be our partner's career, their finances, maybe even their daily routine. I found myself doing this before too, and I made the excuse that, I'm just trying to help. But, I had to learn too that it's a whole lot better if I just sit back and if they want my help, they ask, and that's wonderful, because then it becomes a validating and a very rich experience to be able to give them any kind of advice or any kind of experiential knowledge that helps them. But at the same time, you're letting them be independent and doing your best to never make them feel inferior or that you don't respect them or their judgment. It's important to understand that this isn't a narcissism thing, and this is not from a desire to have to be in control like a narcissist would do. This is actually us trying to feel safe, okay? I want you to really understand the difference there. A narcissist is going to need control because that's who they are and that's how they get their supply. But a victim of abuse as a child that has developmental trauma, that has CPTSD, it literally is about us feeling safe, okay? The more control that we have, the more safety that we have. We learned as a child that even if we could control just little details, maybe we could prevent disaster in our home. So now our brain applies this same logic to our relationships as an adult. It's desperately trying to keep us safe and to prevent chaos, the same chaos oftentimes that we felt as a kid. It's overlapping, and it's very hard to distinguish the two of those. In the end, what happens, which is so unfortunate, is that it ends up suffocating our partners, and it chips away at their trust of us. The last one I want to go over is one that's not really talked about that much, or it's misrepresented. And what it is it's emotional numbing and disconnection. And this is probably the most subtle, but it's also one of the most damaging it really is. It's one of the most damaging probably traits from childhood that we carry into relationships. And I was just taking a brief second there to think about my relationships that I've had, and it's a big deal, especially the emotional numbing. So what happens is that as a child, we expressed emotions. We're trying to gain emotional maturity. We're trying to understand emotions. We're trying to understand how is it, how do we express this? What's the healthy way to do this? It's all part of our psychological, spiritual, and physical development. It's normal. It's what we're supposed to do. And we're not being guided in a healthy way because of the chain of abuse and the family curse and the generational sin that's been haunting most of our bloodlines. And so that's why that happens. And so what happens as a child is when we do show these emotions, when we have an emotion, whether it's anger or sadness or grief or fear, whatever it is, when we show this emotion in childhood, oftentimes we get punished, or we get ignored, or we may even get shamed. Okay, and this is one of the big reasons why shame becomes our identity as an adult. Okay, remember, guilt is the way that you feel about doing something. and you regret it, shame is literally an identity. This becomes who we are. I am shame. I am worthless. I am unlovable. Okay? We need to understand that. So why does this happen? It happens because we learned as a child that feelings are just not safe. They are very, very unsafe, and we need to lock them away. So we learn as a child that we have to shut them down. And so as an adult, we struggle. We really struggle to even identify what we're feeling. People might think that we're apathetic. They may think that we're cold or calculated or even evil. And really what it is we don't even know what we're feeling. Okay. And this is, you can go further and get into psychology, and, maybe we'll do a video on that. If you're interested in it, just comment after this video, but we can talk about the difference between primary and secondary emotions and how that overlaps, because a lot of this also is coming from childhood trauma and childhood development that wasn't healthy. So we experience emotions as physical symptoms, if that makes sense. This is the deepest layer for many people that we have to overcome or understand or start the healing process in. It's very, very difficult. And so if you're feeling heavy right now, listening to this, it's perfectly normal and understandable. Okay. This often is our deepest wound, and underneath all of our anxiety and people pleasing tends to be this profound disconnection from our own feelings. As a child, we were told to toughen up. As a young man, I was told, boys don't cry. I learned how to put a mask on to pretend that nothing affected me. So going into relationships as adult, if a partner wants to have an emotional connection and they ask you, what are you feeling? What is our famous answer? Our famous answer is, I'm fine, right? And I have literally triggered other people in relationships because they genuinely want to know how I'm feeling, and I would just, I'm fine, and I'm fine is so generic, and it's meaningless. And so, you can actually trigger people in relationships by saying, I'm fine, because they know that you're not fine, and they feel disconnected with you because you can't express how you're feeling. Or maybe you'll say something like, I'm stressed, which is very generic. Why are you stressed, right? Why are you stressed? We can't seem to tap into the nuances of sadness, anger, or disappointment. We might feel physical symptoms. Like I said, we may feel tight chest, hollow stomach, a buzzing in our arms, but we don't know what emotion that sensation even belongs to. Very, very tough. So this numbness, this emotional numbness, is actually a form of disassociation, the same dissociation that we had to do as a child to survive. It was literally survival. It shielded us as a child from overwhelming pain. But now what happens as an adult is that it's become a wall, a huge wall between us and our partner. We can't share a part of ourselves, an intimate part of ourselves, if we don't even have access to it. And this is what I talked about in the very beginning of this video, about how we have to get, when we get to this point in a relationship where we are ready to surrender that part of ourselves, we need to understand that this is a part of ourselves that we didn't even have access to. And so these vulnerabilities do come out when you surrender this inner child, because you are also getting to know that part of yourself too. It's an unknown. The only thing that we've known is that I've locked that away and I've protected it from the world. And now this little guy, this little 7-year-old or 8-year-old version of yourself is out in the world. And it's a big adjustment. And we have to learn who he is too. Okay? And so this is a part of ourselves that before we weren't able to access. Okay? So we've talked about the fear of abandonment, the avoidance of intimacy, codependency, the need for control, and emotional numbing. Okay? Oftentimes with CPTSD, these patterns are not separate, but they intermingle, and we deal with all of them. Okay? All of these are a piece of who we are and who we show up as in an adult relationship. It causes and creates frustrating, painful cycles. Okay? But the most important thing that you need to hear today and that you need to realize today, okay, is that they can be unlearned. They were learned behaviors, and that means that they can be unlearned. So, as adults, we can start our healing journey with exactly what we're doing right now by watching this video or listening to this video. We're building awareness and we're starting to understand who we are. We're also understanding the why behind how we show up in relationships. Okay? So by understanding that why behind our actions, we can finally approach ourselves with some self-love and compassion. We can, come at ourselves with some grace instead of always coming at ourselves with shame and thinking that all of this is our fault and it's our identity. We start to realize that these characteristics are not because we are broken, but because we've been hurt, and we've been hurt very deeply. This understanding is what's going to help us make new choices. It's going to help us practice things like sitting with our anxiety and not texting that person back right away out of fear. It's going to help us learn how to set small boundaries. We're going to start to understand and get our body and our mind in a cohesive relationship where we understand that sometimes these physical symptoms that we're feeling that we talked about are actually part of what we're going through psychologically and mentally. I wish I could tell you it was a quick fix, but it's not. It's going to take some work. It's a slow process because we're talking about years and years and years of not only trauma, but of hardwired, disciplined, and ridiculed behavior that we've shown up with in relationships. Okay? So it's not going to be an overnight thing, but it absolutely can be done. Okay? We can learn that there are healthier ways of loving other people, that they're completely and totally possible, and that healing from childhood trauma is a journey of reclaiming the parts of ourself that we had to hide to survive. It's about learning that we are worthy of love, not because of what we do for others, but simply because we are who we are, and that God crafted us in a very unique and special way, and that He loves us. I want to thank you so much today for listening to this video. I realize that it may be a little painful. It may really resonate with you. You can tell as I was doing the video, I had to pause a couple times myself because this is very real. And so I'm coming to you today very genuine and very vulnerable myself, and earnestly telling you that I've experienced many of these things, if not all of them, multiple times. And so I understand. But I also understand the other half of this, because I would not have this channel, I would not have gone on to be a therapist, and I would not be sitting here doing my very best to mitigate the suffering of other people if I had not tapped into that healing journey, and I continue on it every single day. Every single day is another day of healing. And so once again, thank you so much for listening. Please comment, share what this video meant to you, how it spoke to you, because your comments are not just for me. This is a community, and oftentimes something that you share is probably helping one of our brothers or sisters that struggle with what we do. So thank you so much. Until next time, God bless.